You're watching the Fairfax Network, a division of Fairfax County Public Schools. It's programming for students in kindergarten through grade 12. It's programming for professional development for teachers and staff. It's programming for parents and community. Award-winning programming for educators by educators. Register today and visit the Fairfax Network online video store, www.fcps.edu/Fairfax Network, or call 1-800-233-3277.
The following program is a production of the Fairfax Network, Fairfax County Public Schools, funded in part by the Virginia Satellite Educational Network.
Hello, and welcome to the MTA studios and this very special edition of Meet the Author. With me is singer, songwriter, and author John McCutcheon. Today we're going to learn how John mixes words to music, music to words, and ultimately words to picture books. It's a unique process, and there is no better way to find out how he does this than focus on his latest book, Christmas in the Trenches, beautifully illustrated by Henry Sorensen. Based on historical fact, Christmas in the Trenches is about an unofficial truce between German and British forces during World War I. As one soldier wrote, "Here we were laughing and chatting to men whom only a few hours ago we were trying to kill." John, it's a heck of a story. Welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Tel. It's great to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. I see you brought your guitar with you. Did the book begin as a story, a lyric, or a song?
The book actually began as a story that was told me by a backstage janitor right before a concert in Birmingham, Alabama, way back in the 80s. I heard the story. I was so moved by it that I wrote the song during the intermission of the concert. That night, started singing it, and almost immediately dreamt that one day it might be a picture book that kids could use to learn about this amazing story of peace breaking out in the middle of war.
And that concept development happened very quickly, which sometimes when we're developing a story doesn't. It takes a lot longer than that. But this one came very quickly. Can you help us set the scene, the historical context for the story Christmas in the Trenches?
It was the very first Christmas, the very first winter of World War I. It was 1914. The war had only been going on about 3 or 4 months. And everyone thought the war would be over very quickly. No one imagined that the trench warfare would go on for years and years. And the Christmas Eve on one particular front, the English soldiers heard the German soldiers start singing Christmas carols across no man's land, the big muddy field in between the German and the English forces.
And it's hard to imagine that the forces were so close together that they really could hear each other on the other side of the trenches in some places.
Yeah, in some cases they were very, very close, just less than half a football field apart. And they could hear one another talking. So certainly when they started singing, the English heard them, listened, and it was kind of a little musical warfare going back. The English sang something back and forth, and eventually the Germans sang Stille Nacht, which is the English recognized as Silent Night, which was originally written in German. And then the moment of hearing this one very holy song, so well known to both countries, being sung in 2 languages, they must have just realized we're more alike than we are different, especially on Christmas Eve. And then they had a little truce.
It became almost like a very quiet kind of Christmas party.
Well, it was quiet in some respects, and they were playing music back and forth and sharing what little things they had. But then they had a big soccer game, the Germans against the English. And ironically, at the end of that, they had to go back and start fighting again. And what I did with the story was write the end of the song, which was, I couldn't imagine not being changed by an experience like this. And that's what the end of the song and what happens in the book. You have to be changed by meeting someone that someone else is telling you they're strangers, they're your enemy, killed him. Because the people who tell people that are never the ones who do the killing. And that was the point of the song, the story, and the book.
Well, as a musician, how do you typically determine what comes first, the music or the words?
You know, that's a question that everybody asks a writer, especially writers that write both the music and the words.
As in the case of Christmas in the Trenches.
Exactly. Well, there always has to be some kind of a poetic meter which is going to be determined by a melody or at least a pulse of some sort. For instance, if I had made Christmas in the Trenches a waltz, it might have sounded like, "My name is Francis Tolliver, I come from Liverpool." And it might have worked, but it didn't feel conversational, and I really wanted it to feel like this guy was telling you this story.
With music.
With music.
Right.
And there was a little Irish song that was popular during World War I called The Minstrel Boy, which goes, "The minstrel boy to the war has gone, in the ranks of death you'll find him." And in an effort to make it feel historically true and in context, I wanted to use a melody that felt English and felt in the proper period. So you'll see both musically and in the language I use, using phrases like, "I fought for king and country." That was a World War I phrase. Or calling your messmates "me lads," or saying, "He's singing bloody well." This is the way soldiers would have talked then.
So you're really thinking about the setting and what surrounds the setting to make it authentic.
Exactly. The whole idea when you create an historical piece is you want it to be true enough in feel that the story is what drives it. So
share it with us.
I will. "Oh, my name is Francis Tolliver, I come from Liverpool. 2 years ago the war was waiting for me after school. Belgium and to Flanders, to Germany to here, I fought for king and country I love dear. 'Twas Christmas in the trenches, where the frosts so bitter hung. The frozen fields of France were still, no Christmas songs were sung. Our families back in England were toasting us that day, brave and glorious lads so far away. Well, I was lying with my messmates on the cold and rocky ground, when across the lines of battle came a most peculiar sound. Says, "Aye, now listen up, me boys," each soldier strained to hear, as one young German voice sang out so clear. "Bloody well, you know," my partner says to me. Soon one by one each German voice joined in harmony. The cannons rested silent, the gas clouds rolled no more, as Christmas brought us respite from the war. Well, as soon as they were finished, the reverent pause was spent. "God rest ye merry gentlemen," struck up some lads from Kent. The next they sang was Stille Nacht, "'Tis silent night," says I, and in two tongues one song filled up that sky. "There's someone coming towards us," the frontline sentry cried. All sights were fixed on one lone figure trudging from their side. His truce flag like a Christmas star shone on that plain so bright, as he bravely strode unarmed into the night. Soon one by one on either side walked into no man's land, with neither gun nor bayonet. We met there hand to hand. We shared some secret brandy and wished each other well. And in a flare-lit soccer game, we gave him hell. families of their own. Young Sanders played his squeeze box. They had a violin, this curious and unlikely band of men. Soon daylight stole upon us. France was France once more. With sad farewells we each began to settle back to war. But the question haunted every heart that beat that wondrous night: whose family have I fixed within my sights? 'Twas Christmas in the trenches, where the frost so bitter hung. The frozen fields of France were warmed as songs of peace were sung. For the walls they'd kept between us to exact the work of war had been crumbled and were gone forevermore. The name is Francis Tolliver. In Liverpool I dwell. Each Christmas come since World War I. I've learned its lessons well. But the ones who call the shots won't be among the dead and lame. And on each end of the rifle, we're the same.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Song that catches the mood of the event so perfectly. Thank you. Thank you, John
You're
McCutcheon.
welcome. Thank you.
Do you have a question for our guest artist? Call us. Our phone lines are open. The number is 1-800-231-6359. Meanwhile, we'll go to some pre-taped questions for John McCutcheon from McKinley Thatcher Elementary in Denver, Colorado. Let's go to the tape and find out what students really want to know about John's latest book, Christmas in the Trenches.
I'm Anna Mutz from McKinley Thatcher Elementary School. Mr. McCutcheon, I loved your book. Do you write a song with every book you write?
Did you do research about World War I in preparation for your book, or did you just go by what the janitor told you? Is there any specific reason why you named your main character Francis Tolliver?
I liked how soccer was a unifying part of the book. Do you play soccer? Do you like soccer?
You're watching Meet the Author on the Fairfax Network.
John, these are some pretty impressive questions.
They are. They're especially the soccer one. Yeah. I love soccer.
Well, we're going to start first with Anna's question. She had the first one, and she wanted to know if you write a song for every book you write.
All of my books so far have been based on songs that I've written. There are some coming up that are based on stories that I've told. But right now, yes, everything is based on a song.
All right. The second question was, did you do additional research for the book, or did you just go with the story that the janitor shared with you?
Well, understand the song came first, and the song just flooded out of me. And I think anybody who writes anything, whether it be a little term paper for school or a novel, experiences something when you don't know where it comes from. Sometimes there are songs and stories I write, others there are some I just write down. They seem to just come from another place. That was the story with this. That being said, before I turned it into the book, I did do more historical research. But for the song itself, nope.
Right.
I made up the name Francis Tolliver. I decided he was going to be from Liverpool. I was going to put him in this place. The important thing was to create a character that was believable and that you could crawl inside this guy's skin and walk around and be there in the trenches. That was the most important thing.
And one thing I do like about the book is you did add a historical footnote at the end to give some background information, as well as some teacher resources.
Well, a lot of people through the years never really believed that this event actually happened. They treated it as though it were some kind of fable. And fables are stories that teach us lessons, but this happens to be a true story that teaches us a lesson.
Well, you had mentioned Francis Tolliver, and that was a made-up name for the character of who was telling the story to his grandchildren.
And like the language I chose, as I mentioned before, I sang the song, I wanted to have a name that felt as though it would be a real name to someone who came out of England in 1914. So Francis seemed more English to me than Bob or Jim or Frank. And Tolliver, actually, I picked that particular name because Francis Tolliver worked with the meter of the song, and it felt nice on my tongue. And again, part of writing is, how does it feel to say it? How does it feel to hear it? Does it feel right somehow? And I just got lucky.
And so the lyrics for a guitar might not necessarily be the same as you would develop for another type of instrument, and you've brought another one along with you today.
I did, and one of the things that has helped me a lot in my writing, both for books and for songs, is that when I was, the age of the kids who are listening today, I fell in love. I loved all kinds of music, but I really fell in love with the stories that folk songs told. And these were songs that survived just because people liked them. There were never any videos, they weren't written down, there weren't CDs, there weren't big stars who made them popular, there wasn't radio. It was just, I sing a song, you hear it, and you like it, and you remember it.
They survived because of their quality.
And just because of their quality. And there are not a lot of songs today that, would pass that kind of test. So, for instance, there's this one song, it's my favorite folk song, my favorite song, and it's just 4 lines long, and I loved it so much that I've tried to write verses to it, and they never did anything for the song. So I'll play it for you. It's a little song called Step by Step, just 4 lines, and I figure if I could ever write a song that says everything it needs to say in 4 lines, I would be a writer.
All right, I can't wait to hear it.
So I'm going to use this old instrument here. This one is not that old, but this is an instrument called the hammered dulcimer, so called because you use these little wooden hammers to strike the strings. And it's an instrument that comes originally from what is today the country of Iran. And I'll use it to play this folk song from West Virginia. Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, singly none. And by union, what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none. Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, singly none. And by union, what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none.
Well, as you're coming back over here, Grant had written what your favorite folk song was, and you just told us step by step. Is there another favorite that you have?
I love an old song that I think originally comes from Scotland called The Water is Wide. It says, the water is wide, I cannot cross o'er, and neither have I wings to fly, but give me a boat that can carry two, and both shall row, my love and I.
Oh, that tells pictures with words,
it does.
doesn't
It's beautiful, isn't it?
This is from Stephanie. She would like to know if you have a favorite book. And I know that you had an entire album of favorite books that you had put together briefly, but...
I think my favorite book is written by a Colombian writer named Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and its name is 100 Years of Solitude. Be looking for that. It's a great book.
What about for kids? Do you have a favorite?
I do. I love The Yellow Star, which was written by my dear friend Carmen Agrediti.
We had her on the show as well.
And illustrated by Henry Sorensen.
Same illustrator. Very talented. Thank you. Well, once again, via videotape, let's listen to some of the questions posed by students from Denver, Colorado. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Tyler Tolan, and my question is, do you have any family members who fought in World War I?
How did writing this book change or support your feelings about war?
Which is more difficult for you to write, stories or songs?
When you write, what process do you go through to develop your characters?
And you are watching Meet the Author on the Fairfax Network.
Great questions.
John, again, great questions.
30 minutes? We only have 30 minutes?
We only have 30. So let's start with the last question. When you write, what process do you go through to develop your characters?
Like any writer, the first draft is just get it out. Don't do any editing. And I have to write with a yellow legal pad and a pencil. I'm sorry, nothing else works for me. Then I will take it to a computer, put it in the computer so I can cut and paste and make and try to figure out if maybe the story didn't come out exactly as I want. Then I try to see, do I like this character? Or if I'm not supposed to like the character, do they have the qualities that really make me not like him? So I try to, I test it out a lot. And for me, a song or a story is like a boat. It's not really what it's supposed to be. A boat is not what it's supposed to be until you put it in the water. It can look like a beautiful sculpture, but it has to float and it has to act like a boat. For me, a song is not a song until I sing it for someone, or a story is not a story until I tell it to someone, and then I can see, does this really work? Are the ideas I want to get across really working? So that's, and then I ask people, is this character believable? Do you know?
And of course, we teach that in schools. Think about your audience and the sense of audience and how it's going to be. What kind of message are you getting it across the way you want to who's going to be picking up to read it, or in your case, to listen to it.
And does it feel? Does the whole thing feel right? Because in Christmas in the Trenches, there are some historical inaccuracies, but even the historians have not come to me and said, well, there wasn't really gas in 1914.
Were there any others?
Yes. Well, in the song I say, this is not in the book, by the way. In the song, it starts off saying, the war was waiting for me. 2 years ago, the war was waiting for me. And actually, the war had only been going on for a few months when the truce happened. And I didn't know any of that because I didn't do any research. But I took a little poetic license.
Well, why do you suppose that the experts, on the historical experts of World War I, or the Great War as it's also called, haven't called you on those?
I think because, well, I would like to think because the story works. And they're not going, they see that this is a story. A good story is always more than about the story. This is obviously about the issues of war and peace and anonymity. And what happened in this is all of a sudden you knew the people who were supposed to be your enemy, and it had to have changed you.
Well, did writing this book change your feelings about the war?
Well, I grew up in a tradition that calls for resistance to war. I'm a Quaker. So I had a story I wanted to tell anyway, and this story told itself. I didn't have to impose anything on this story.
Well, is there a folk song that sums up your feelings about war, not included in your book?
Well, there are many stories that tell the stories of ordinary soldiers, the people that you never read about really in the history books. In our history books, we hear about generals and presidents and great heroes. What we seldom hear about are just the ordinary people. And what folk songs and the songs that I try to write are focus on those greatest stories never told.
Well, we're almost out of time. Will you sing another song for us?
I will.
Great, but before you do, I've got some information I'd like to share with our
Certainly.
viewers, and then we'll come back to you. To learn more about this series, visit the Fairfax Network at www.fcps.edu/Fairfax Network. To learn more about John McCutcheon, visit www.peachtree-online.com. Or to learn about his music, visit www.folkmusic.com. So John, what will you play for us today?
Well, it seems appropriate that I would play a song I wrote called The Greatest Story Never Told. And we'll see how many of the students out there can recognize the history stories that this talks about.
Let's listen.
I was the eyes for Columbus. I was the hand at the wheel. I mined the coal for Carnegie. I made his fortune and steel. I was the guide light for Lewis and Clark. I saw them safe to the sea. At Monticello, I was the fellow who built everything that you see. I was John Henry's partner. Without me, he'd never have won. I laid the tracks from the ocean. I forged the gold spike when it was done. First on the beaches at Normandy, I was the first one to fall. Though you may look in your history book, not find me mentioned at all. They remember my name in the evening, when the fires fade to embers and coals. With all the deeds I have done, will I be the one, or will my life be the greatest story never told? Tubman came knocking, I hid her safe in my barn. When the Nazis were rounding up Jews in our town, my lock kept them sheltered from harm. Martin marched into Montgomery, I was right there by his side. When the battle was mounted, I stood to be counted, part of that great rising tide. They remember my name in the evening, when the fires fade to embers and coals. All the deeds I have done, will I be the one? Or will my life be the greatest story never told? Age upon age it's recorded. The story is always the same when our children are charting the future. Who are the heroes they'll name? And when history comes calling for blood and for bone, and we each take our place in the